All right, welcome back once again. I'm back in the parking garage, and today we are going to talk about how to spin in inlines. I've seen a lot of people get inline skates to replace their ice skates or to be able to practice off ice more efficiently. And the one thing that I see people struggle with the most by far is spinning, because it is quite a bit different than spinning on ice. It feels very different than spinning on ice, but actually all of the fundamentals are pretty much the exact same. So we're going to talk about it, talk about some of the differences, some of the similarities. If you can spin on ice, you can figure it out on inlines for sure. If you're just learning it for the first time, I'm also going to talk about what you need to figure it out, what kind of prerequisites that you want to have before you start to learn a 1-foot spin on your inline skates. And yeah, let's just get into it and I'll figure it out as we go. So the one big difference between spinning on inlines and spinning on ice skates is that on inlines, you're going to be using your toe stop. So you're going to be a little bit more forward than you would be on ice skates. So on ice skates, you'll kind of be on the ball of your foot because of how the way the blade curves. You don't have to lean forward as much. On inline skates, you really have to have your toe stop down. So you're going to be all the way to the front of your toe. And it does feel pretty different, but once you get used to it, especially for things like scratch spins, it really doesn't feel so different. It's just there's a little bit more drag, and it's not so smooth, and you can't keep it going for as long. That is one thing. Also, the surface that you're spinning on makes a pretty big difference. So this is not really a super ideal surface to be spinning on because there's no slide at all. I have tons of traction, and that actually can kind of be a little bit easier because you can feel the ground a lot and you can really feel where you're at, and you don't have this fear of your foot sliding out from under you. But it does make spins slow down more. And fair warning, if you're spinning on concrete or any rough kind of bumpy hard surface, it's going to eat through your toe stops really fast. I could probably go through a pair of toe stops in a week, especially just spinning. I could probably go through a pair of toe stops in 3 days, just practicing a lot. So fair warning, you might not want to spin on concrete all the time. Also, you'll want to rotate your toe stops pretty often if you're spinning on inlines a lot, or if you're spinning on concrete a lot, because it's going to eat through them and they're going to get really slanted. And some people like them when they're like that, but I try to rotate them so that they wear down a little bit more evenly and I don't have to replace them the second that they start to have like a diagonal cut through, because you're wasting like half the toe stop. There's still a lot of rubber there that you could have used, so that's just my tip. So first things first, before you learn a 1-foot spin, and I'm going to focus on the forward spin for this video, the prerequisites that you want to have going into this. I would work on a 2-foot spin. I don't really practice these a whole lot personally, but it is really helpful to be able to have because you can use that as an entrance for your 1-foot spin starting out. It also just really teaches you how to keep good posture while you're rotating and to be able to use both of your edges. This is a 1-foot spin tutorial, but I am going to give you a really quick rundown on 2-foot spins because they kind of overlap a lot within the technique. So for a 2-foot spin, and I'm going counterclockwise or to my left, you're going to be using your inside edges. No matter which way you go, you're going to be using your inside edges. But for counterclockwise, I'm going to be using my right inner forward edge, and I'm going to be leaning a bit towards my right heel. And I'm going to use my left inner back edge so that I'm leaning a bit more towards my left toe. So this is going to kind of prepare you more for a left inner back spin, or a forward spin as it's usually called, even though it's a backward spin still. Whatever, different tangent. So the way that you should really learn that is just standing here, both your feet underneath you. You're going to bend down, and you don't have to use your shoulders a whole ton, but especially on this surface where you have a lot of traction, you do kind of have to use your shoulders a bit more than you might on ice. And that's kind of the case with inline, in my opinion. You just have to use your shoulders a little bit more. You don't want to swing your shoulders into it, but you're using them to kind of accentuate what's going on with your feet. So you're going to have left arm in front, right arm out to the side, so that you can kind of pull into this spin. You're going to bend down, and you want to push your right inner forward edge forward and your left inner back backwards. So you get this kind of movement. Now you can just start working on that so that you can get some confidence pushing into the spin. Once you have that, you want to start to put a little bit more oomph into it, and then you kind of pop up onto your right heel and your left toe a little bit more. So you go from this to that. So that's the quick and dirty of how to learn a 2-foot spin. Getting into your 1-foot spin is actually not that hard. From a 2-foot spin, you can literally just do the 2-foot spin, lift up your right foot, and you're on a 1-foot spin. And it's not going to happen that easily, obviously, but if you keep doing it, you'll figure it out. This really helps you to feel the right way to use your toe stop. So one big mistake is that People say that you have to spin on your toe stops on inlines, and I say that it's kind of true. But this kind of makes people think that you need to be only on your toe stop and that you're just pivoting right on your toe stop. Your wheel is still touching the ground and you're still making a circle the same way you would on ice. So it's not gonna be like this. I see a lot of people try to do that. That's crazy hard. Like, no wonder you can't do a 1-foot spin when you're trying to be just on your toe stop, because your toe stop is not completely flat and it's not really meant to be stood on like that. You have to have the right angle to be able to do the spin, and to be just on your toe stop almost never works out well. So what you really want to focus on is this feeling of dragging your toe stop behind you. You should hear it kind of on the ground. And so one way you can practice this if you're having trouble getting that drag with your toe stop is to do something like a mohawk or a 3-turn, whatever you're comfortable doing, so that you can have this drag. And this is what I mean. Lean up to your toe stop and then kind of just come to a stop or let it kind of ride out until you step down. If you're really beginning and you haven't even gotten to that point, you can also just try going backwards, put both your toe stops down and come to a stop. That's gonna help you learn how to use your toe stops without just completely leaning onto your toe stops. Like here, you wanna be here. So your first wheel, even maybe your first 2 wheels, depending on how your wheels are set up, are gonna still be on the ground. And you're still gonna be rolling and you're still gonna be covering some distance. In a 1-foot spin, that distance is gonna be in a circle. It's not gonna be straight across a line, obviously. So then the challenge becomes, how do you make that straight line into a circle? Another prerequisite that I would really recommend is having an inner back loop. So if you don't know, an inner back loop looks like that. Probably wasn't a perfect one, but if you can use that edge and you can lean onto that toe stop just a little bit without stopping yourself completely, and you can pull into that rotation and check back out of it, you have all of the fundamentals to do a 1-foot spin besides the entrance. So then it really just becomes a matter of learning how to get into the spin. And I'm gonna show you a few different entrances that you can work on to get into the spin. I'll start with some of the easier entrances and then we'll make our way to the left outer forward 3-turn, which is kind of the standard way that you're gonna see people spin. So like I said, we have the 2-foot spin entrance where you're just gonna be doing a 2-foot spin and pick up. That's a good way to get into it, but I find it kind of difficult to make that transition from 2-foot to 1-foot without something getting a little bit off. Because when you do a 2-foot spin, you usually have your feet kind of out to your side and you want your left foot directly under you when you're spinning on 1 foot. So it's kind of difficult to pick up that foot without this circle getting a little bit too wide. So it can be a little bit difficult to pick up that 1 foot without the circle getting too wide, but it is a great way to kind of get into it and to feel what's gonna happen in the spin. So let me give it another try and see if I can really get one to work out well. That's more how I'd recommend doing it, is pushing up and then immediately once you start to push into that spin, just pick your right foot up. Don't try to stay in the 2-foot spin for too long and then pick your foot up. It's a good way again to feel it out and kind of experiment with it, but once you want to get that 1-foot spin spinning and stable, you want to pick that right foot up pretty quickly and you're pushing yourself onto that left foot when you do that 2-foot spin rather than starting the spin and then picking the foot up. That one actually worked pretty well, but it's a little bit trickier. It can get a little bit out of control, so just a little tip on that. Another way that you can kind of get into a spin, and I really like this for the back spin, is to do a pivot. So for my forward spin, I'm gonna put my left toe stop in the ground, and the same way we pushed into the 2-foot spin, I'm gonna use my right inner forward edge. I'm bending down onto my left leg and then pushing with my right inner forward edge here. And so you can just do a few pushes and then stand up. I know that sounds really simple, just to do a few pushes and then stand up, but it really just takes some practice to figure out how to push into that right and to be able to balance on 1 foot. So if you can balance on your left foot and you can push with your right foot to make this rotation happen, it really is just a matter of figuring out where you're gonna transition your weight and feeling it. Now, when you stand up into the spin, you're gonna wanna keep your left arm in front and your right arm kind of out to the side. And I like to have my free leg, so my right leg, somewhere between the side and the front. It can kind of be either one, whatever you prefer. But I think the easiest way is to kind of split the middle and have it down at like a 45-degree angle. So if I'm looking this way, it's about 45 degrees to my right, not quite an L. But if I'm making an L with my arms, then my leg is pointing to the middle of that L. And that just gives you kind of a nice stable base. To be able to have your leg in front gives you a little bit less wiggle room with leaning onto that edge, so you really have to have it set up right. So I like to have it a little bit out to the side so that it's kind of acting as like a counterweight for the spin. I can really feel how my free leg is pulling into the spin well, and that helps a lot. I also see some people go into their spin from a mohawk, so they're going on a right inner forward edge, they change, and then they try to pull into it. As you can see, you can learn it that way, but fundamentally with a mohawk, you're gonna be covering space going forward or kind of linear. And that's gonna make it a lot harder to get into a spin without it traveling. And traveling on inlines is not as easy to do, which is kind of a good and a bad thing. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse. You kind of have to center your spins a little bit more in inlines for them to be very successful. But it's also a lot harder to save a spin that is traveling. So I try to just avoid learning any kind of spin entrance that's gonna make you travel. Also, when we do this, we wanna make sure that we really have good posture. So I want my shoulders to be directly above my hips and directly above my feet. And you're gonna have to bend your knees, but when you bend, try not to lean forward or to let one of your hips push out to either side too much. There is a component to the hips pushing out to the side that kind of pushes you onto an edge, especially with the backspin. You kind of have to push this hip out to the side just a little bit to be able to lean onto an outer back edge like this. But if you're trying to do that, you're gonna overdo it, so just let it happen naturally. Don't try to force your hip out to the side unless you're really struggling with it, and you can kind of play with that. But really just focus on keeping good posture, straight up and down, and squeezing really well through your whole body to make sure that everything stays tight and nothing kind of gets loose. Now let's talk about the 3-turn entrance. This is probably the most difficult one that you can do, honestly. It's the standard, and it's actually really easy once you figure it out, but it takes a while to figure out how to do it right. So what you see a lot of times when people spin, and this goes for ice as well, people push into their 3-turn, and they really crank their shoulders into it, but they're not getting the right tracing on the ground. So the tracing that you want to happen is gonna be kind of a fish hook shape or like a half heart. So you're making a big circle turn into a small circle. And I think about this kind of like you're locking the spin into place. So you have this big circle and then you wanna lock it in so that it almost makes like a 9. So what you see a lot is people push their shoulders into it and they just do it like a regular 3-turn and then try to pull in from there. And just like the mohawk, it's gonna make you travel, if not just completely fall out of the spin or fall onto the ice or the ground. So what you really want to happen is to have this edge tighten in until you naturally kind of do the 3-turn and come out in a controlled circle. So for me, that's gonna look like this. So if you look at the tracing that I made on the ground, it should have really made kind of like a half heart, like I said, or a fish hook. You need that hook in to be able to keep your spin centered, and really to be able to get into the spin well at all, you need to lock that spin into place. Now, a lot of people turn their shoulders into it, like I said, and they go like that, and then just try to pull in. I can only pull that off because I've been spinning for quite a while. But normally, I mean, if I was first learning that, that would probably have failed every time. So what really made it click for me was bringing my arm behind me. So my left arm specifically, you really want to have that left shoulder help you deepen the edge. Now there is something to be said for having good edge control and being able to just make the skate do that by leaning onto an edge. And that would look a little bit more like that. But that's really hard, and it also doesn't really get you a lot of snap into the spin. And with inlines, you don't have as much speed in spins in general, so it's really important to kind of get that arm behind you and help you snap into the spin. It also helps you kind of feel the 3-turn a little bit better because you have this left shoulder pulled back, and then once you do the 3-turn, like a regular 3-turn, it's gonna snap and you're gonna feel it come back in front of you. So I just think it's a lot easier to control whenever you have that hips and shoulder motion in the spin happening. Now you can use the kind of method that I said doesn't work. You can use it to learn how to make that fishhook shape happen. So putting your right arm in front and pulling your left arm behind you, you can kind of use that to let you figure out where you're gonna be leaning onto that edge. So as you just saw, that really helped kind of make that edge do what I wanted it to do. It's very hard to lean onto that edge and get it to tighten, and see, like, that was my best attempt and it still didn't work. So I almost never do it like that with my shoulders completely still. But what I prefer, as opposed to just pushing into it with your arm in front, not only does it not look so great if I try to swing into it like that, it can be a little bit hard to control until you know what you're doing. So I really like to keep my right arm out behind me and then let my left arm open up into it so that you kind of have that opening and closing motion. And really what I think about a lot is letting that arm open up, and then that left arm is gonna stay where it is while the rest of my body comes to meet it. So really let me do this facing away from you. So really, if I'm pushing into the spin here, that left arm comes behind, and now that's gonna stay there. Everything else is gonna come around to meet it. So that gives you kind of an opportunity to pull into the spin in a controlled way. It also gives you the opportunity to use your free side, so your right arm and leg, to really generate some more rotation and generate some more speed into the spin. Without that motion of having the left arm in front and the right arm coming back in front to meet it, I just find it really difficult to keep any kind of speed in the spin, and it's just not as easy as it is on ice. So the technique's a little bit different, but the fundamentals are the same. It's just more difficult to do it the way that you might see on ice on inlines. But really, once you have those fundamentals down, it really is just doing a 3-turn and then holding an edge. And I heard it described that way a lot when I was starting out and thought, like, oh my gosh, it's so much more complicated than that. But it really isn't. It's really just a 3-turn into an edge. So if you can do a good outer forward edge, make that edge tighten, and then 3-turn and pull in, you can do a spin. And I know that that's a lot easier said than done, but it really just takes some practice of learning how to rock up onto that toe stop mainly, and to make the edge do what you want it to do. Once you have the 3-turn down, you can do a whole bunch of things into it. So you can do a crossover, step forward, which is technically a Choctaw. You can also do a right inner forward 3-turn, step forward. But it's all the same from the point that you push off onto that left outer forward edge. And so it really isn't so complicated once you get into it. So yeah, that's kind of the basics for spinning in inlines. It can get a lot more complicated than that, especially when you start to get other positions in there. But really, the fundamentals are always the same. You want to make a fish hook shape, you want to do a 3-turn, and you want to pull into a clean spin. Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to talk about for right now. I'm going to try not to let this video be like a million years long like last one. And yeah, let me know if you need any clarifications, any questions, and I will see you next time. Bye.